Welcome back to our boat shop, everyone. My name is Joe Buskins. I'm a second-generation professional boat builder, and I hold a 100-ton captain's license that I use during the summer and spring months to run our 29-foot charter boat here in the background that our family built over the last couple of years. You guys have been following along. We've been doing a whole lot of DIY type projects here lately. Of course, we've got a ton of videos documenting the build of our 29-footer and a lot of fishing videos as well. But it seems like the how to fiberglass over plywood, how to gel coat, how to repair gel coat has been really, really popular with you guys. And I've had a lot of comments and comments that are pertaining to safety and also to volatility of the chemicals. And obviously we've got a lot of chemicals back here. We've got polyester resin, and we're adding something we haven't really been working with much on the channel thus far is epoxy resin. And I know a lot of you guys are using that kind of stuff. And safety is always important. Obviously, you always want to wear PPE and whatnot. But we've also been having a lot of comments about stuff catching on fire and fumes and danger. And we obviously want to do this safely. So I thought it would be kind of fun today in a controlled environment. We are going to see how hot we can get this material to go and just see, in fact, what happens. Now, I've got some safety gear here. I got a brand new, fresh fire extinguisher and a fire blanket. We are in an open shop, and I'm gonna have some fans moving, and we're gonna do this safely. So disclaimer, do not try this at home with intent, but we're gonna over catalyze some polyester resin, and we are gonna put a pretty good mass of the epoxy, and we're gonna just see what happens. Honestly, I've seen resin get hot before, and I know it will smoke, but I'm gonna intentionally see what we can do. Now what we have is about 1/4 of a cup or so in this little disposable little throwaway mixing cup. And typically in a full quart of polyester resin, we would usually go somewhere around 10 or 11 cc's. So I'm gonna get a little crazy. I'm gonna go darn near that much in about 1/4 of the resin. So that is gonna be way over catalyzed, like big time. And you can see here that we went with some of the dyed catalyst, which a lot of people have questions. Basically, that is exactly the same as the MEKP 925, but we add a little bit of the red dye. Now that is something you can probably ask your supplier about and see if they can source that for you. And you can see that it is turning red. It really lets you know when that is thoroughly mixed, and that is probably going to be just fine. Now what we're going to do as a comparison is we're going to mix it in a mass, and then I'm going to put a small amount in a smaller cup and show how having a large mass makes a difference as far as how quickly it cures. So what we're going to do is just take a bit. Highly scientific methods here, folks. Good old boat shop experimentation. So, yep, there we go. Now that is going to be our polyester resin. And I'll show you guys, now this is the same polyester when we built our 29-footer. It is made by Polint. It's a Dion or Dion 6631. That is going to be an isophthalic resin, which isophthalics are a little higher caliber than your orthophthalics, but they're not going to be as high end or high caliber as a vinyl ester. And with mentioning vinyl ester, that's one of those resins we don't talk about much, but I was going to get some, but a 5-gallon pail of vinyl ester resin right now is $450 for a 5-gallon pail. And I don't really have a project that I need that for, so I'm spending some money burning up some material just to do this experiment. But if anybody wants to send me some vinyl ester, we'll throw that into the experiment. So what we've got here is your standard West Systems, the 105 epoxy and the 205 hardener, which are both very popular. I'm going to save you guys the time of watching me dispense that. That'll be 12 full pumps. And if you've never used the West Systems, they come in a really cool little calibrated pump system, and basically it's going to be a 1-to-1. So this is dispensing a smaller volume but it's one pump to one pump to get your mix. So what we're going to do is we're going to give this one, that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And 12. I hope I counted that out right. You let me know down in the comments below if I got that number. It is very important, by the way. Epoxy is a thermoset resin. It's very similar in how it needs an activator, but the ratios have to be very, very precise. With polyester and vinyl ester resins, there is a range that you can catalyze to, and generally you guys will hear me talking about 1 to 2% for the kind of material we work with, which is your standard marine laminating type resin. Now there may be some specialty casting resins out there, like for example casting insects. I know some people actually preserve bugs and whatnot, and I believe they catalyze at a lower ratio, but generally 1 to 2% is going to be the magic number. Now, with epoxy, you really need to mix it thoroughly. West Systems and most other manufacturers recommend about 2 full minutes of mix time. And so the amount of material you've got mixed up, the mass of the material, the amount of catalyst you add, and then there's another variable, and it's going to be temperature. The colder it is, generally the slower these materials are going to kick off at. The hotter it is, the faster they're going to go. And as they start to cure, they generate heat. The heat accelerates the cure, and you have this runaway, call it boil over or flash over. It will literally smoke. I know that for a fact. But like I said, I've never really intentionally done this. But again, mixing very thoroughly, and you can see that the epoxy takes on a slightly different tone as well. Not unlike the polyester resin. Of course, you folks aren't here, and normally I would recommend wearing a respirator and obviously Tyvek suit and gloves, but they smell distinctly different. And that is one of the reasons why a lot of people prefer to work with epoxies over polyesters. Is the solvent, the base material is a different material. When we're dealing with polyesters, you're going to be dealing with a styrene monomer base. So that is what you would actually use to thin polyester and even vinyl ester resins up to about 5 or 10% maximum. And again, that's another thing that comes up for debate a bunch, guys. Some folks say mineral spirit, some folks say acetone, and I am sure that there are instances where those may work, but all of our reps and folks that work for our big warehouses and suppliers all agree that styrene is going to be the proper thinner for your polyester based materials. Now, if you guys wanted to thin your epoxy just a bit, you can actually use denatured alcohol. Just a couple splashes of it, again, probably in the 5 to 10% zone. And that works really, really good when we are fiberglassing or epoxy coating wood and you want a penetrating coat. You can thin that resin out just a bit, and it will really get down and grab into the fibers and give you a really good, strong mechanical bond. I know a lot of folks at the word give it some tooth, give the material some tooth. You would use something like an aggressive, a really good, that's going to be a 36 grit sanding disc on like a little high-speed grinder, and you really want to put a nice aggressive texture into that material. So we've mixed that very thoroughly. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. Matter of fact, I want you guys to have a visual, so I'm going to go from this little disposable, we call that a popcorn cup. That is a handy little thing to have around the shop, one of those consumables that A little bit cheaper than if you were, there you go. And you can see that's got that nice deep color there. That lets you know that it has been thoroughly mixed. And we're gonna do the same experiment. So I wanna show again the difference when you have a large mass of material and a small mass of material. Now folks, I've grown up in this shop and I've worked with a bunch of different materials. It seems like polyester resin and vinyl ester. Polyester and vinyl ester are similar, but not many people use vinyl ester. Now, it may be a resin you may want to consider for some projects where you want some of the workability. For example, you can use CSM or chop strand mat with both polyester and vinyl ester resins because they are styrene based. Remember, we talked about that. And especially mat or CSM here in the US, in the States. Now, some of you folks overseas, like in Europe, for example, or maybe even in Australia, UK, you may be able to get some CSM that does not have the same binders, and it can actually work in some instances. But that is very, very specialized CSM, and we do not have access to that over here. But we do have quite a bit of experience working with epoxy. While that is kicking, I'm gonna tell you what, if you folks wanna follow me over, we actually built a number, forgive the dust there, I got the shop environment, but back a few years ago, we built a number of little stitch and glue style. Now this was marine plywood with West Systems epoxy, and we did the fillets on the seams, and you get this real nice clean interior. Matter of fact, I have templates and designs, and I've kind of been kicking around the idea of building one of those to demonstrate working with epoxy and wood here in the boat shop and building a little skiff. So maybe you guys can leave a little comment down below and let me know if you think that would be a cool project, or we may even do a miniature boat or something like that. Now would also be a good time to tell you folks how much we appreciate you guys tuning into the channel. And if you want to see us do more of this, because this isn't my full-time profession yet. I run a charter boat full-time, and we also do a lot of repair work here in the shop. But when you guys give us that thumbs up, the nice comments down below, going ahead and hitting that subscribe button, it allows me to justify spending money and materials and doing these experiments and stuff that maybe answer some questions for you guys. So back over here, so what we're going to do is it may take a few minutes. Again, as I mentioned, temperature can be a real factor. And again, you want to be careful doing something like this intentionally. You do not want to be breathing these kind of fumes on purpose. Now, you folks have seen me use a Craftsman heat gun again. And for the sake of making the video and just seeing if we can move things along, and yes, this is another thing I get a lot of comments on. Safety is obviously very important. A heat gun, there's a heating element in there. There's not like an open flame, but obviously it still gets very hot. And if you're ever using one, you would want to be super careful with it. It's a good idea to have a fire extinguisher in your shop, maybe a fire blanket, and just be prepared for worst case scenario. Of course, hope that never happens, but it is better to be prepared. So what we are going to start doing, generally with a heat gun, we're not going to get terribly close because this thing puts up off enough heat to physically burn you. But I'm going to throw a little heat at these two batches and see if we can't accelerate things along. Now, one thing you can do to prevent this kind of flashover or boil over, or they call it an exothermic reaction, is you can spread the material out. Obviously, when you have it in a mass like this, it'd be like people huddling up together for warmth. And if people are standing real closely together in a small room, you're generating heat. Whereas if everybody can spread out and you get some airflow through the area. So I actually found some cool little paint trays today, just some little tiny ones. And if you can put it in a container and you want to get some airflow over it, Only mix as much as you need at any given time and continually turn that material over. If you let it sit static in a mass, that really accelerates it. Now, obviously, if you're doing a larger batch, you can use kind of, maybe my cameraman there can pan over the larger black disposable paint trays work really good, and it spreads out the material, and you're not going to get nearly as violent reaction. Now today, again, I mentioned temperature. We're holding down here in my part of the world at about 63, 64 degrees. And for our friends overseas and in the UK and the whole rest of the world that's on the metric system, I believe that translates to about 17 degrees Celsius. So again, you guys help me out. I'm trying really hard. It's just a system we grew up with, but I would love to adapt more of the metric into what we're doing. So I'm gonna throw a little more heat. This is also a good time to tell you folks that we are trying really hard to answer as many questions. Again, I grew up in a boat shop. I've been doing this my entire life. I have decades of experience. Licensed with the Coast Guard to build boats professionally for the general public. I hold my own HIN number, which means when I manufacture or build a boat such as our 29 over here, I can issue my own HIN number, which is like a VIN number in a car. And that's how the Coast Guard can identify that vessel as one that our family built. Now my father, he was also a boat builder, and he held an HIN number for the boats he built as well. You guys, we appreciate all the comments though. And again, if you have suggestions, I'm doing this experiment just for you guys because I've had a number of comments and suggestions. And maybe this will save you guys from wasting some material. Now this may take a few minutes, again, because it's relatively cool. I don't know how long this is gonna take, and I don't want to waste your time. And we do have fans here in the shop. Again, I'm going to be careful. I know a lot of folks are worried about me breathing this stuff. Compared to the time we spend when we're actually doing a project, these little experiments that I'm doing for you folks, very small amount of time, and I'm doing a lot more talking. When we're actually building something, we don't talk as much. All right, now I don't want to heat that too much. And again, if you're using a heat gun, obviously you would want it kind of away from your volatile chemicals. Pretty much everything that we work with in the boat shop has some degree of, they call them VOCs, or volatile organic compounds. Not something you want to really breathe a lot of, but epoxy tends to be less offensive to most people than vinyl ester and polyesters. Now, we're going to give that a second, but I'm going to jump over here as well and give you guys a little teaser on the next episode. The popularity of the plywood and fiberglassing the plywood videos, that video did really well. And again, I want to thank you guys for watching and recommending that. And I plan on actually doing more of that. But between now and then, after the epoxy video, we are going to do a strength test, marine ply versus the Coosa board, which Coosa is very similar. I believe a lot of you folks in the UK or overseas may be using a product called Thermolite. That would be a comparable material. Now, the Coosa is what we actually built all the interior framing on our 29. All the floor panels, all the cap rails, and if you wanted to see how we use that, again, if you're new to the channel, feel free to jump back there. We've got well over 20 videos documenting the build of that boat, all the way from separating the mold from the pattern or the plug to spraying the gel coat. We did a hand layup with biaxial glass, and we used the same polyester resin that I showed over there on our big wet out gun, the Polent isophthalic. Very good stuff. So this ought to be fun. We're actually going to test some of this material to failure and just see which material can hold up to some abuse here in the shop, just see which one fails fails first. All right, so let's see. Oh, wow. Okay, so check that out. We are now beyond, we're no longer in a liquid. That is starting to firm. It's got a little give to it, a little tacky on the surface, and I'm feeling some warmth. I'm actually feeling a little bit of warmth on there as well, but this is, the epoxy is still in a liquid state. Now, I believe that's probably one of the other benefits, and of course we catalyze this on the very high side, but it seems like generally epoxies are going to give you a little longer working window. I'm really going to throw a little heat at that epoxy there and see. Now, one other point or tip as well to remember is that, let me see if I can get one of these materials. This is another question a lot of folks have, and we talk about materials that are compatible with different resins. And you guys again may have seen in one of our other videos where we used the CSM mat over the biaxial cloth to really smooth out and blend the transitions. The CSM is also really, really good as like your first coat. It tends to hold more resin. It's not as strong as your biaxial cloths, but it has a really nice cosmetic finish. It's really good at initial bonding, and I really, really like it. The problem is, again, it doesn't typically work well with epoxies. It just won't bend or work the same as it does with a polyester or a vinyl ester resin. And that's why a lot of folks are going to be using a biaxial cloth. And what is interesting about most biaxials, again, if you're new to fiberglass, it has a material woven on the backside that looks very similar to the CSM, but it does not have the same chemical binders that matte by itself has. So you're going to want to be working with a biaxial glass or a very fine, like a 4 ounce or a 6 ounce finishing cloth. And again, if you want to learn more about that, we've got a couple videos here in the channel, 4 or 5 videos back, that we talked about different fiberglass fabrics and the best place to use them, even how to cut them and shape them and handle them. So yeah, so there we go. So we're moving right along. We are not smoking yet, but it is definitely, there's starting to be some warmth there for sure. Now, we are actually firming up on the smaller amount as well, but I believe there's still a little, let me just test that and see if there's any liquidity to that. That is starting to firm up as well, but not quite so much. You just kind of have to take my word for it. I can feel that starting to go. All right. Really throw some heat at this and see what we can do. Now's a good time to let me know what you guys enjoy working with. Again, the comments, we would consider building something here in the shop that might encompass a lot of these techniques. I was thinking of a small wooden boat. That might be of interest to you folks. Maybe there's some resin brands or materials out there that you guys really enjoy working with, or maybe you would like to see some head-to-head comparisons. What we're doing right now is because of you guys, your input and suggestion. I hear you. I'm listening to you. We also try to respond and comment back when you guys have a question. Some questions are more detailed. And like I said, I have a pretty busy life, and sometimes it is hard for me to get back with everyone that comments. But I want you guys to know I read every comment, and it means a lot to me that you guys take the time to comment. And most of them are nice. Every now and again I get somebody that wants to give me a hard time, but generally everybody's been really, really nice, and we do appreciate. We try to keep this channel a place to learn and be positive. Try to keep the angry folks. Oh, there we go. There's the smoke. Yep. Yeah, we are at this point, we are starting to smoke. And like I said, I am a trained professional. Let's move this out here closer to the edge of the shop. Let's just see what happens. All right, so the polyester, these two seem to be firming up about the same. What's interesting here is the epoxy in the thinner mass is still quite liquid, and this is really firmed up. It is no longer in a yeah, and that one's putting off some heat, like for real. for real heat. I'm gonna turn a fan on, and I'm actually gonna put again, don't do this at home. It's dangerous if you're starting to crack. Look at that. Look at that. Okay, folks, you can actually see the heat is starting to melt. The heat is melting that. It is actually melting that container. You can see that is also breaking up the polyester resin. Polyesters and vinyl esters are going to do that more so than epoxies. The epoxies tend to get quite hot, but they seem to be more stable. Yep. Again, I'm going to move our safety gear right close, and if I need to, I can just get this right out of the shop. I'm actually going to put that in contact with what I would consider a pretty commonly combustible item in your average boat shop. That is, we call that a shop towel or a mechanic's towel. They are really nice. Again, look here, this is getting so hot, it is melting over here on this side as well. You can see it is getting hot enough to melt. Interesting. I've seen the resin, I've seen this happen before, but like I said, we don't typically do this on purpose. Let me know if you guys are enjoying this kind of stuff. Kind of fun for me too, I won't lie. Kind of enjoy. My dad, he always enjoyed experimenting. And you can see here again, very interesting, the epoxy in a thinner volume, still in a completely liquid state. And that's what I've noticed in the past, is that epoxy has some great benefits as far as its lower smell. It's very strong, it bonds really well with wood, but it seems like you need to mix it in much smaller batches, or else you'll get that exothermic, that flash over or boil over. So you're only going to want to mix as much as you need for the next, say, 10 minutes or so, and then you need to move right along. That's too hot to touch. That's yeah, they're both quite warm. I can touch them, but you do not want to be in full contact. But right now, again, I've got a lot of comments. Folks are like, hey, material like this will explode, it will burn your shop down, it'll catch fire. Now, I've always removed materials from the shop. So if you mix a batch of epoxy or gel coat and you can tell it is starting to get hot and get an exotherm going, I like to remove it. Oh yeah, that's getting hot enough to melt through. Interesting, yeah, this one really, the epoxy seemed to generate more, or it melted through more than the polyester did. Yep, check that out. Hot enough to melt the container. pretty hot. Now back to vinyl ester though. A lot of similarities with polyester, but vinyl ester resins are better at blocking moisture, which is kind of one of the attributes that epoxy resin has. It is more expensive. I was actually kind of surprised. Right now, vinyl ester resins darn close to $100 a gallon, which is about what most epoxy is running these days. Epoxy's running probably a little over 100, but still, it's expensive, or considerably more expensive than polyester resin is. So that may have something to do with the job and the material you're choosing for the job. If it's an older boat and you only expect to use it for 10 more years, polyester resin or vinyl ester resin are going to work great for you. Yeah, that actually feels like that's actually starting to, it's not as hot as it was. I can put my finger on it, but it is, I'm pretty tolerant. I've got gloves on and I work with tools. Hands are pretty tough, kind of used to working with that kind of stuff. All right, I tell you what, no fire yet, and I believe we've reached maximum. We did get smoke, no fire, and we've got a combustible, you know, we put a combustible material right in contact. I'm gonna hold this directly too and just see what happens, but I kind of knew the outcome when we started, folks. I've dealt with this so much. I've seen it get really, really hot, but I can't overemphasize safety. And if you notice it starting to boil over or flash over, please remove it from your shop. Please work with a respirator. Do not inhale the fumes, and always just be safe. Once again, thank you guys so much. I think that's going to be the end of our little experiment. I don't see that going to burst into flames. But again, if you feel like you enjoyed what we're doing, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It does help the algorithm. It helps me do more of it. Give us a comment down below. Like, if you got a friend that likes to build and repair stuff, we love the shares as well. It's Captain Joe here with Island Marine Charters down in Gulf Shores, Alabama. Fish Bump TV here on YouTube. I'd like to thank you guys. Also like to thank my cameraman Logan for doing such a nice job. As always, we will catch you guys next time out.